So we have a dog here that does not like being crated, obviously. But what we're finding is this is not a crate issue because
it's a mom issue.
It's a mom issue, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get this dog to be in a crate, obviously. We are going to go over some basic steps here on how I would typically go about starting this process, and essentially ultimately like why I feel like the crate creates a lot of problems with dogs, right? So if you look at a crate in general, right, again, 9 times out of 10 we have either with dogs separation anxiety or confinement anxiety, right? Those are the two very common things that we see out of dogs. Separation anxiety being the trigger is you, right, being the person, which is what I would consider his would be, right? Confinement anxiety being when the actual act of being confined is what the actual trigger is, right? So confinement being like a pen or a car or a crate or whatever it may be.
He did have confinement issues. It couldn't be in a room, it couldn't be anywhere left alone.
But a lot of times, like sometimes they can have both, right? But a lot of times the confinement with a dog that already has separation anxiety just enhances on the actual separation anxiety, right? Again, we're seeing right now, like this dog is very clearly distressed just being away from you in general. So what we're gonna do here,
like 5 feet.
Exactly, right? So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna try to get his attention on something else. In this case, it's gonna be staying in the crate. Now what I'm gonna be doing is I'm gonna be doing it without the leash, or not without the leash, sorry, without the crate door being actually closed, right? I want him understanding that I want him to be there and I want him to stay in there and that door is doing nothing. This goes back to the same concept we talked about yesterday, which is the idea that physical restraint of some sorts makes problems worse, right? So if we put them in the crate and as soon as they get in, we slam that door shut, we close it and lock him in, well, we already don't even know that he's gonna stay in there if the door's open. So because that physical barrier is the only thing keeping him from getting out of that crate, it's gonna make the problem worse, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through kind of a sequence of steps here of how I'll go about introducing this. That door is doing nothing. This goes back to the same concept we talked about yesterday, which is the idea that physical restraint of some sorts makes problems worse, right? So if we put them in the crate and as soon as they get in, we slam that door shut, we close it and lock him in, well, we already don't even know that he's gonna stay in there if the door's open. So because that physical barrier is the only thing keeping him from getting out of that crate, it's gonna make the problem worse, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go through kind of a sequence of steps here of how I'll go about introducing this. All right, so first things first, I don't need the e-collar. I am gonna use this obviously to enforce a boundary, but first thing I wanna know is make sure that he's gonna be able to get into the crate well initially, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna use the leash for this, and I'm not gonna give a verbal command or anything. This is gonna be like the leash training stuff we were doing last time. Before I put any sort of cue to things, I need to make sure he knows how to physically do it. So I'm gonna walk him up. Just gonna leash pressure him into that crate, make sure he gets in, and then I'll let him come right back out. And I'm just gonna do that a few times here. So no huge problem there, obviously. So what I'm gonna do now is I'll start adding a word to it. So I'm gonna walk up, I'm gonna say crate, let him go in. At this point, I don't want him to step out of the crate. So if he were to step out of the crate, I would tell him nope. I would help him right back in with the leash. Okay. Then I'll do this a few times. Crate. Okay. Crate. Okay. And one more. Crate. Okay. All right, so we see that he has no problem getting into the crate, right? And a lot of times, a lot of these dogs typically will get in fine. It's just the act of having them actually hold the position that they struggle with, right? So, e-collar remote. So what we're gonna do next here is we're gonna start adding in the e-collar pressure into this to create a boundary. That boundary being me not wanting him to step out of the crate. This is gonna be real similar to the boundary training that we were doing at the doorway yesterday, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna walk up, I'll tell him crate. If he gets in, great. If he doesn't, at this point, I'll mark with no, no, give a tap, and then I'll help him into the crate. Okay, and I'll do that a few times here. Crate. Nope. Okay. Crate. Nope. Okay. Good. Okay. Now if I wanted to, I can obviously use a reward there for that. Not worried about it right now though. All right, so the next step here is going to be creating stability in the crate with me not standing directly next to it. So what I'm going to do first here is I'm going to start with just the leash. I'll kind of just walk around a little bit here. If he steps out, what I'm going to do, no, is I'll mark with no, give a correction, and help him right back in. So I'm creating that boundary of right here. Okay. Great. Now, a lot of people would be quick to ask for a sitter down here. Like, that is something you could enforce eventually, but right now you got to keep the criteria very simple, right? Just the boundary of staying inside of this thing. And what we're doing is we're making the crate something that seemingly to him is this random thing that has all these associations with negativity or whatever it may be. We're turning it into nothing. It's just an obedience command like everything else, right? This is the same process as what I would use to teach like place or bed or something, right? The only difference is we're using it inside of something. Okay.
We do place at home, and that is his place on the bed.
Great. So this makes it easier, obviously, knowing that that bed he's used to getting on, right?
But I will say that our place is not a
bed. Oh, it's not?
No. Just go put your feet on it. Well, he lays down.
I saw you work on it yesterday with him. It seemed like he knew it pretty well. Excellent. So he's doing pretty good with me walking around like this. And any whining, like we were talking about yesterday, I'm not going to be correcting for anything. It's pretty subconscious. Right now, the idea is taking half of his brain, right, and making it focus on something else, right? I know he's concerned about you. We're working on that also. Like we talked about yesterday, you have to tackle that side of things, of the reason why he's having these separation anxiety issues. But the other 50% is teaching him to physically stay in here because he knows that's what he's supposed to be doing, not because something's holding him back. Okay, come on. All right, next what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start trying to drop the leash. Crate. So I'll drop the leash, I'll walk away, and it's gonna be the same process. If he gets out, I'll mark with no, give a correction, and then take him right back over and put him into the crate. Okay. Great.
Would this be the same process for puppies, or is puppies?
Depends how old of a puppy are we talking?
Like 8 weeks.
No. No. I don't start e-collar until usually about, at the earliest, like 5.
In the crate and telling them to do that kind of stuff.
Oh, you definitely could. You would shape it with food though, okay. Right? And I would spend a lot more time on each individual step, right? So first things first, I would just repeatedly get him in, reward, get him in, reward, get him in, reward, and start conditioning that good marker like we did with your dog, meaning stay in there, right? From there, you could start, creating a little distance. Good, come back, reward, right? Ugh. Okay, so next step here is adding the door back into the equation, right? So, crate. We know that this door in itself has a lot of associations to the dog, right? So what I need to do is I need to start to decondition the door a little bit, right? And what I mean by that is make sure that he starts to understand when it closes, that doesn't mean that that's the thing holding him back again. He's still actively doing it on his own, whether the door's there or not. So what I'm gonna do is I'll walk up, I'll close it. This is one of those tricky ones. Yeah, it's fine. And then I'm just gonna leave it closed for a minute or so there. Now, while the crate door is closed, what I'm gonna be looking for is any sort of pawing at it, anything like that. Really anything specific, right? Whining, even barking at this point, I probably wouldn't correct for just yet. I'm looking for something specific, like pressing the nose or pawing. If I saw that, I would mark with no, give a correction, all the same. But what I wanna do here is I wanna start closing that door, walking back, opening the door, and I'm not saying anything here. This is just like the doorway work that we did yesterday. I'm gonna open it, walk away, and if he were to step out, I would correct and then get him back in again, right? So I'm making it so that whether this door is open or closed, even if I'm not saying anything, it doesn't change the fact that you're still in crate. Now, when I come back to get the leash, if they have a leash on, I tend to go back, pick up the leash all the way first here before I go to release them. Because for a lot of dogs, what you'll find is when you're working duration work, the leash picking up starts to quickly become the cue for the dog to get up, right? And that's just because what most people do is they go, okay, right? So they do it at the same time. So because of that, they start reading this as the cue, not the word. So I try to separate those as much as possible. Great. You made it.
Yes, we did.
As he kind of thinks about it a little bit. And he's a smart cookie, like he knows what he's doing here, right? And like we talked about yesterday, I think like this is a dog that seems to me like he's just had a little bit of a lack of accountability for things, a little too much loving sometimes, you know? And that's where a lot of his problems are coming from, because he picks things up very fast, right?
I was going to say, is that the majority of
Yes.
everyone's problem here?
Yes.
Is it's always
Yes.
the humans?
Yes,
never the-
yes, yes.
Right.
You wouldn't believe like how I kept getting on you over like touching your dog and like talking to your dog and stuff like that. I do lessons with people. Like I did a lesson the other day with somebody who, it was a first session, and I'm sitting there and I'm trying to work with the dog, right? And like, I'm having a conversation with her, holding the dog, and like every 4 seconds, she's just like taking a step closer and like looking at the dog and taking a step closer and looking at the dog and taking a step closer to the dog. And like as we're talking, like I see her arms just like going like this. It's like she wasn't even aware that she was doing it, right? But it's like, this is why, you know, like you can't even control yourself in the presence of the dog. So how do you expect the dog to, right? So yes.
That's just all because we overhumanize them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for sure. Excellent. Okay, come on. It's like I'm comfy now, right? It's like I'm not getting out. All right, so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna add some distractions, and I'll have you be the distraction here. So, great. So, I got him in there. I'm gonna have you get up and just start walking around.
Away.
Just in, you know, around in general. That little lip curl he gets is hilarious. Now, for obviously any trainers here or anything, there's a lot of ways to condition an e-collar, right? There's a lot of, you know, people that will do it and spend the time using like continuous pressure on low levels and conditioning in like the off switch essentially, right? Like negative reinforcement for this. The reason why I'm switching right to like essentially punishment for breaking it and using an actual correction here is because one, we don't have the time to sit here and condition it in, and two, because he already has a fairly good understanding. He was getting in smoothly with me. It's not like we're completely teaching something completely, no, foreign to him right now, right? Just walk around a little bit more here. Now the next lap around, I'm gonna have you come really close to the crate. Ooh, caught himself. Now walk to right about here and then pretend you're tying your shoe. This is just working on impulse control here, right? A lot of these issues that we're having, right, are impulse control issues. The dog can't control their impulse around all of these different things. So that's what we're teaching them to do. Okay, let's do it one more time. Same deal, do the shoe tie. The subtle whine is almost worse than like the actual bark. You know, like I almost would prefer them to just bark.
Yeah.
Like,
No, you wouldn't. His bark is
horrendous.
creepy little.
Yeah. Alrighty. No. Same deal, picking up the leash, becoming the cue to get up.
Keep going.
You sit down.
So every time like you pick up the leash and he does try to come out, you would just reinforce that.
Oh yeah. Just
Try
correct
again.
for it, get him back in. And usually what I say is initially when you're working on this, pick up that leash and just exaggerate the fact that you're not getting out yet, right? I'll sit here and hang out for a minute if I need to, right? And then once I'm fully sure that he's stable there, then okay, you can release him out. All right, I'm gonna do this one more time with him here. Great. Okay, I'm gonna have you actually get up and just walk towards the cars.
Set it up too.
Just drive, just leave. Yeah.
Dave, I know you're just nicking him, but are you using the momentary or continuous button on your button?
Continuous, yeah. I rarely use momentary.
So do I.
Yeah.
So you've been continuously.
No, so anytime he steps out, anytime you've heard me say no so far, I'm following it up with just a tap.
The only time.
The only time. Yep.
What's the difference between the two?
So
The button that
yeah, there's a continuous button and a momentary button. So continuous, you could hold it down and it'll keep going. So like when we're using it for negative reinforcement, if I want to teach this crate as an off switch, say he had never been in a crate before, or I was conditioning the e-collar like a little bit longer of a process, I could hold the button down, guide him in, and release when all four paws get in. And then we're teaching that as an off switch so that when I hit the point where I start switching to the correction, he has a little bit better of an understanding of what that pressure means.
Like the prong collar?
Exactly, right? Like I said, we kind of sidestepped that problem, or not that problem, that process, just because he already had a fairly good understanding of it. So I felt like he would be able to pick up on the fact that like, hey, I'm just creating this boundary here.
So momentary, no matter how long you hold it.
It just goes one time, yep.
Yeah.
Not too shabby.
He only whines when you're in earshot.
The whining's normal, right? This is something you could be working on at home with him, you know. Starting to create a little bit of that forced separation and starting to get him realizing like he doesn't need to be directly next to you all the time, right? And what you'll see is he'll go through that cycle of whining, maybe standing up, laying down, and eventually he's just gonna realize it's not working, right? And just take a little nap in there or something. So.
Can you take that crate home with you? Practice.
And here's the thing, like you have a good process now, like you're not having problems at home or anything, but it's good to at least know we could do it. You know what I mean? I say like whenever my dog's struggling with something, I want to try to work them through that issue, right? So a situation like this, if you do need to crate him or whatever, right, you're able to,
Yeah.
you know?
That's when it always happens, is when you're stuck in
Yep.
an emergency and you
Exactly.
need to watch it and
Yep.
have 7 dogs and it needs to be created.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's like, you know, like I said, like when dogs board at our facility, right? Like they can't be out, right? There's no other option, you know? So they just kind of have to get used to it. So, excellent. So that's pretty good.